Hello, my name is Dave Myers. I'm the director of the Berks Alliance. We want to thank you for joining us today. I'm going to turn
Right.
to John Weidenhammer, who is
Yeah, absolutely.
our director, our chairman of our board. John.
Hi, Dave. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining the call. We really appreciate it. On behalf of the Berks Alliance investors, I want to thank everyone for joining the call this morning. It's really the financial support that comes from the Berks Alliance
we still have some strawberries if you want to
possible.
eat.
So again, thanks for being with us.
They'll be good, but look at them.
I'll provide a reminder to everyone. The audio experience would be a little bit better for everybody if you put your microphone on mute, except when you have a speaking part. So just a reminder to everybody, the Berks Alliance is a collaboration of anchor institutions in Berks County with a focus on improving the health, wealth, and education attainment of our population. I want to thank our presenters, Mark Morrow and Robert Maxim from the Brookings Institute. Also want to thank Dave Myers, our director, for putting this terrific presentation together today. So Dave, I'll turn it back to you so we can keep going. And thanks to all of you for joining the call as well.
Yep, thank you, John. As John pointed out, we'd like you to mute your microphones, but keep your video on so you can see we're dealing with live people. That's always nice to know. We will record this program. We will send a copy of the recording to everybody who registered for the event. We'll also post it on the Berks Alliance website, and we will share it with our friends at BCTV. We ask you to use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to submit comments and questions. We will get to those once we get through our formal presentation. And with that, I think we're ready to get started. Let me introduce our two presenters today. Mark Morrow is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute in their Metro program. His work historically is focused on superstar cities and places left behind. Not sure exactly which one we qualify for. Maybe we'll find out today. And most recently, he provided some informal counsel to Governor Shapiro's transition team. So we'll see some consequence of Mark's activity here in Pennsylvania, hopefully shortly. Joining him is Robert Maxim. Robert is a senior research associate at the Brookings Institute. He had previously worked for the Council on Foreign Relations. Today, our topic is Commonwealth of Innovation, a policy for revitalizing Pennsylvania. And it's a report recently done by Mark and Rob for the Brookings Institute. So with that, Mark, we'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for having us. Thanks, David, Greater Reading, and everybody on today for turning out to listen and participate. I fondly remember releasing an earlier Brookings report in Reading, and your governor, then Governor Rendell, piling on to it and holding it up and saying, this is what we should do. So that was a highlight of my earlier career. But my colleague Rob and I are delighted to give you a quick briefing on our brand new report, Commonwealth of Innovation, a policy agenda for revitalizing Pennsylvania. Let's go back one slide. We'll just show you the cover. Pictures 1,000 words.
Yeah, let me.
Can you do that? No
I will
problem. Or we could just move forward.
I'm letting people in, so let me see if I can go back and do that.
Okay.
Correctly.
Yeah, you had it. It was working fine. There you go.
Okay.
There. So go to slide 2, and there's a look at the aforementioned report that we're going to be discussing about. This was done in 2019. It was a follow-up to a report we did in 2019 at a time at which there was very little discussion of innovation in the state. Our report was designed, to follow that up. We initially put innovation in some ways, I think, back on the agenda when nobody else was talking about it. And then with this current report, we wanted to kind of level set the moment in the Commonwealth set on an agenda for re-energizing the state's innovation economy at a time of, what I think we concluded was drift. So this was a statewide check-in, and that the government, that the governor-elect is already taking on looking at this and signaling his supportive aspects of it, means that, was a good time to touch base, and that it's a very important time, I think this year and next, for getting the state back on track. So let's move ahead to the next slide. Our plan here is to, first set out the state's next the drifting situation on innovation, and then to suggest some policy-related problems and corresponding recommendations. Let's see, can you advance the slide?
Yep.
There you go. All right.
I'm sorry, I'm struggling with logistics here. There we go.
There
Okay.
you go. So that, just 2 slides. We're going to go pretty rapidly, so there's time. We could move on now. But we want to make sure there's some time for discussion. So let's, knowing that Greater Reading and a number of good groups in your region have been keeping the state, the region abreast of its, economic trends and needs, and kept things well informed. I'm going to go pretty quickly, but you can see here, sort of our starting point. It's important to note, that Pennsylvania really does have a rich innovation history. There's a usable history, a history that's very suggestive about the potential of the state when it gets its act together. You have strong R1 and R2 universities. If you think of powerhouses like Penn, Pitt, and CMU, but also incredible institutions like Drexel with its toehold in your region now. So for years, the state also, in terms of policy, was what Rob and I called an innovator at innovation, meaning that it proliferated a number of, at their time, leading edge innovation and high value economy strategies, such as the Ben Franklin Technology Partnership, started in 1983, and then Life Sciences Greenhouse Initiative, Keystone Innovation Zone tax credits. What's more, supporting innovation has been a bipartisan tradition until recently. Governor Thornburg created the Ben Franklin Technology Partners. You can see him there. But Governor Casey continued it. Governor Ridge and Governor Rendell were each supportive of tech-based economic development. So that's great. That's a usable history. But let's move to the next slide. The state, though, has been increasingly drift on innovation activities with multiple governors now, until the current one, I would say, mostly AWOL on high-level signaling and action in recent years. You can see the benchmarks, markings of multiple studies have been showing the region going sideways. The state has been ranked often in, not dire, but in a second tier, and it hasn't moved much. This is looking at reports, the tracking for the Milken Institute and another innovation oriented think tank, ITAF. So state has been sort of stuck in a second echelon despite top flight assets, and has been going sideways. And that was the conclusion Rob and I reached in our first report at the end of in 2019, and nothing significant had changed in that. Let's go to the next slide. Innovation, because it matters so much to economic performance, the state's drift is also, though, resulting in broader economic drift that people feel. For one thing, Pennsylvania is struggling with plodding sub-average productivity and income growth. You can see productivity on the left here and income growth on the right. again, not dire, but not in a leadership area, and I think there has been a sense of drift economically. If we go to the next slide, it is true though that and then contributing to this has been and directly related to innovation shortcomings has been sub-average advanced industries growth. That's Pennsylvania there in dark blue, again, pretty lackluster. Advanced industries, which are high value export driven industries with high R&D levels and often high STEM worker concentrations, really matter for your ability to create good jobs, robust supply chains, and regional prosperity. And you know that in your region with your strong presence in the battery industry. But here, if you go to the next slide, it's true, you could see that the state has been building up some compelling advanced sector industry clusters, particularly in the life sciences, especially in the Philly area, and in computer and information systems, AI, robotics, automation in greater Pittsburgh. In this connection, it's worth noting the Reading area is developing relationships to those state specializations, especially through the big presence in your region of jobs in other electric equipment and component manufacturing, clearly anchored by East Penn manufacturing with 2,500 jobs added in the last decade. That's right there a story of the value of these advanced industries. They don't have to, innovation doesn't necessarily mean creating the newest digital chatbots. It more often than not has a lot to do with advanced manufacturing and advanced production. So you have a toehold there and have seen significant growth in this sector, mostly driven by East Penn manufacturing. So let's go to the next slide. So that's a bright spot. And the region, has overall, because of that, seen this growth of advanced industries employment, ticking up significantly during the last decade, and so largely driven again by that company. You've seen added growth, grew by 13% in the decade compared to the state's 9% growth in the sector. So, that's a demonstration of the importance of these advanced industries, a demonstration of your region's ability to field innovative, skilled work, and to grow in this most useful way. But let's go to the next slide. With that said, though, new firm formation in the Reading advanced sector, new organizations, new firms, central to dynamism, really important to have that growth. And yet you're seeing that slowing, as it has across the state and indeed much of the country. We've seen a sort of ebbing of new firm formation. Reading, has actually outperformed places like Erie and State College on this, but there is this concern about the direction of entrepreneurial activity. And that's clearly central to the future of the region. And I know it's been a topic of the Elevate Burke strategic plan, for instance. So it's good to know that you're working on that direction, in this direction, and we can talk about possible ways for state support to help you further. But let's go to the next slide. And so those are some of the, what we'd say are, pretty mixed trends underway in the state and here. Now let's turn to the underlying sources of the problems we see and a few of the recs that we've been making, including to the Shapiro transition. Here, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Rob, but first I'll quickly get us started by giving just a quick overview of our overall agenda, and then Rob's going to dig in a little more deeply. Basically, though, you can see here we highlight 4 priority themes for unlocking the innovation capacity of the state and promoting greater participation in innovation for people and places. Innovation is, yes, a game for innovators and individuals, but it's also a game that's about ecosystems and whole regions. And that's, fundamental aspect of how Rob and I see things here. At the top, though, you can see we're really challenging the state to, above all, commit to innovation, frankly, as it is not really in the last decade plus. The state needs to try harder on innovation. It needs to center innovation as a key theme, and it needs to really pile on to that with meaningful programs and investments that we think exert leadership for the state, but also seek to unleash bottom-up energy in regions and to defer to regions' sense of their needs. The state has assets, but they're not being nurtured and supported and linked. Beneath that, though, we call out 3 needed themes for serious work, and you can see those here. Accelerating commercialization in the major university hubs like Pittsburgh and Philly. Certainly, those are crucial. But fostering innovation in the rest of the state, namely in smaller metros like Reading, that is absolutely going to be crucial in the next decade. And then insisting on inclusion, both of places, but of people, marginalized groups, and those who are not connecting with the innovation economy or even the broader economy as a whole. So critical given your large Latino population in the city. So with that, Rob's going to look at the cross-cutting vision and the 3 themes one at a time. Rob, do you want to take over here?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So I'll turn now to detail some of the factors that we have identified that are driving the trends Mark just discussed, as well as the policy agenda that we've assembled to respond to those challenges. So if you want to move on to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. Our first point is that, as Mark alluded to, Pennsylvania's state government has in recent years really lacked a clear commitment to supporting innovation. And so as we show on the right here, even with the modest boosts to innovation funding in the most recent state budget, Pennsylvania's innovation funding is really just a fraction of where it was prior to the Great Recession in 2008 to 2009. And then beyond that, we don't show this here, but it mentioned in the report, Pennsylvania really lags several peer states when it comes to investment in areas like technology transfer and other related innovation investments, with Ohio in particular spending about 5 times what Pennsylvania does in a typical year. So moving on to the next slide, in response to that, we see the need really for 3 key policy areas. First, Pennsylvania leaders need to set a vision for innovation. They need to really think through where the state is moving. And so that consists of, in our opinion, the governor and other state leaders leveraging the bully pulpit to convey the importance of innovation and the need for policy supports. We also think that state government leaders should convene business leaders from across the state to develop a new innovation strategy commission with the goal of publishing a state innovation strategy to guide the state. And we think that strategy needs to be updated at regular intervals. Next, the Commonwealth needs to center innovation in its economic development activities. So that means, in addition to a commitment from the governor, he should also appoint innovation champions to other high-level economic development positions in the state. And then, we identify a variety of moves in the report that the governor can make to elevate the cause of innovation. These include updating the mission of DCD to more clearly embrace innovation and elevating the importance of agencies like the Office of Technology and Entrepreneurship. And then, we think the Commonwealth needs to just rebuild its innovation budget. The state really needs to shore up its core innovation programs. So that includes things like the BENS, but it also needs to begin making new investment into communities across the state, which I'll detail more in a minute. So moving on to the next slide here, the next policy theme is really about maximizing the potential of the state's bigger city Research One university-oriented startups and scale-up ecosystem. But more importantly, it's about connecting those major innovation hubs to the rest of the state. These innovation ecosystems have been generating a ton of IP, but as you can see here, they're really not converting the above average R&D happening there into new firms in promising areas. In particular, Pennsylvania as a state lags not only its competitor states, but the nation as a whole when it comes to new tech and innovation firm formation. So we think that any strategy for the state needs to acknowledge the role of these core ecosystems, even as it speaks more broadly to the needs of smaller towns and rural areas. So given that, move on to the next slide here. The state needs to enhance its investments into supporting the growth of science-based startups in larger cities and then across the state. In particular, we think Pennsylvania needs to generate a bottom-up, regional-based ecosystem building at scale by challenging its university-based innovation communities to to win what we're calling a Pennsylvania Innovation Hubs program, which would be a major $30 to $50 million grant program designed to advance compelling plans for regional innovation ecosystems to help them work together in new ways to deliver really major sector-based innovation initiatives, something that we don't think has been happening in recent years. Meanwhile, other aspects of this would mean embracing, basic best practices that other states are doing. Things like doing more to help communities in the state win innovation-focused federal funding opportunities, or establishing an SBIR and STTR match program to further support startups in the state with winning federal funding. So moving on to the next slide here, we think that one of the largest factors contributing to this Pennsylvania's overall economic drift is the fact that despite many great community level efforts, innovation is struggling in many smaller communities across the state. So here you can see the change in the share of advanced industries jobs in the state. So those are the really innovation intensive, high R&D, high wage advanced industries jobs. So, as you can see, and as Mark alluded to earlier, Berks County, along with some of its neighboring counties, has really seen positive advanced industry growth in recent years. And Berks County was able to weather the pandemic recession and really appears to be preserving the gains that it made over the past decade. So on the policy side, then, we really think it's time for the state to offer greater support for innovation efforts already happening in communities, as well as to ensure that this advanced industries growth continues in places like Berks County. So moving on to the next slide, in terms of policy, our first recommendation is that the state should design and fund a 20 region challenge grant complementary to that larger one that I mentioned on the last slide, with the aim of catalyzing regional innovation ecosystems in smaller communities across the state. So this could be, basically a state level grant analogous to larger federal investments, things like, the Build Back Better Regional Challenge or the NSF Engines program. And the goal here would be to help smaller market Pennsylvania regions, which could include Berks County, strengthen their local ecosystems to support and nurture innovation, entrepreneurship, and cluster growth. As Mark alluded to already, Reading and Berks County are doing a lot of this already. So the aim here is to provide state resources to enhance the efforts that you've been taking on for several years now. We have a few other policy items here aimed at smaller communities across the state. The first is to establish an advanced industries innovation voucher program, which we think could help companies access the really great R&D going on at universities across the state. So this program would allow companies to pay universities to help them answer a pressing innovation or product development question. And the goal would really be to spread the benefits of Pennsylvania's world-class research institutions to more communities across the state. And then finally, we think the state needs to continue building on the funding that it's provided for initiatives like, the Penn State Launchbox Network. The reason we like things like this network is because, it's an existing distributed network of nearly 30 locations across the state, really in communities of all sizes, including Penn State Berks. We've spoken with several Penn State campus chancellors. I think we've gotten some good insight both into the interesting work that they've been doing, as well as the limits of this program, given its relatively small initial investment. But we think, there's significant potential there if the program could be adequately resourced by the state. And then moving on to the next slide here. Finally, in addition to inequality by place, Pennsylvania's innovation and entrepreneurship system is unequal across different demographic groups as well. In particular, women, Latino or Hispanic, Black, and Indigenous workers and entrepreneurs are really greatly underrepresented, both in innovation jobs as well as firm ownership. So on the right, we show the stark disparity in ownership of firms with employees in Pennsylvania. Despite accounting for over half of Pennsylvania's population, women are the majority owners of just 18% of employer firms in the state. And as you can see, Latino or Hispanic and Black entrepreneurs each account for just 1% of employer firm ownership in Pennsylvania. So, we'd be curious to hear whether these trends reflect your region's experience, especially given the significant share of, Hispanic residents in Reading and the county as a whole. But here we have some thoughts, at least on state policy and what the state can do to help make Pennsylvania and its innovation ecosystem more economically inclusive. So moving on to the next slide here, broadly speaking, we see three themes that the Commonwealth needs to focus on when it comes to improving inclusion and innovation and entrepreneurship. So first is the state needs to grow a more inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem. The state government has already taken some steps to this effect, things like its efforts to center inclusion in the state small business credit initiative program being funded by federal money. Other ideas we suggest included creating a state CDFI fund, growing the state Minority Business Development Authority loan program, and better leveraging public procurement to support underrepresented entrepreneurs. From there, we think the state can do more to get underrepresented workers into advanced industries careers. We know in the report there are a lot of great regional and local efforts attempting to do this already. So rather than reinvent the wheel, we think the state can play a bigger role in funding and convening the variety of regional organizations already focused on connecting workers to advanced industries jobs. We also think the state could do more to fund things like childcare and other wraparound supports that can help workers access advanced industries jobs. And then finally, the Commonwealth should work to make STEM education more equitable, ranging from pre-K through higher education. So to do so, we suggest things like creating new programs to attract diverse STEM professors and doctoral students to Pennsylvania universities, as well as create more STEM research opportunities for diverse undergrad students. But waiting until students get to higher education to support STEM learning really is typically too late. So we also include several ideas to bolster STEM education for underrepresented students at the pre-K to 12 levels, things like strengthening the Pennsylvania Department of Education's PI Smart grant program, which supports STEM education in schools across the state, among a variety of other ideas that we include in the report. So that gives you a bit of a feel for our agenda. So based on how it's been discussed today, we're really looking forward to seeing how Governor Shapiro engages on innovation, both by elevating it as a priority and then in future years bringing real investments to it. So I'll turn it back to Mark in case he has any last items he wants to add.
That's great. Very helpful. And I think you can begin to pick up the thrust of our work. I think we think that the state as a whole has been somewhat passive over the last 15 years. We think it needs to become more active in supporting high value employment and innovation. But that's not to the exclusion of bottom-up work in regions. And we think that you need a supportive state government to help unleash the regions. So we put our confidence more in Berks County, in Erie, in the regions, including the regions with Research One universities, Pittsburgh and Philly, and are critical. But so we see a bottom-up kind of energization that's needed here, but it can't be done alone in the regions. And there's a need for, at minimum, support, but likely significant investment from the Assembly. So we're happy, though, to, as planned, we've left a little extra time here, so we'd love to jump into some questions. Feel free to suggest those, and we're happy to take a stab at it.
Should I go through the rest of the slides? I think there are 2 or 3 more slides.
Yeah, I think those are some extra slides that we
Those
might
are
have
sort of
on
extra.
accident, from
Yeah.
the previous part. So I think you can take those down.
Yeah,
I'll-
don't worry
I'll-
about those.
I'll go through them quickly and then we'll come to some questions and comments.
Okay,
I think that's it.
perfect. Well, thank you.
Now we're back to the crowd theme.
I did see one note in the chat asking about the governor's education strategy, and I don't have good visibility to all of it, but I do know that they're very supportive of one thing that we think is very important, which is the PA Smart initiative that Rob mentioned. Education and training with a focus on STEM initiatives, and also importantly apprenticeship and those kinds of sort of alternative non-strictly BA goals. We think that's extremely important and valuable in the innovation sector. I don't know, Rob, if you have more you wanted to say about PA Smart, but that is highly aligned with the kind of approach that we think is called for.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I'll just note, and I think this kind of gets to the question about the plan to increase the quality of education in Pennsylvania, is so much of it. I mean, at the end of the day, the governor can propose, but it really does come back to the state legislature as well. And that's been one of the challenges with PA Smart, is it's kind of come in a couple rounds of sporadic funding that the last administration was able to use some flexible funding to create. So I think the question is the governor able to work with the state legislature to carve out some really solid multi-year funding to think about these investments? A lot of them are difficult to do with kind of one-off pots of funding, especially given the scale of the trends we're talking about and how many years that the state's been digging itself into a hole in some ways.
Yeah, it's a 10-year lag that we're trying to overcome here.
It's important. No one should cede an inch of ground on the idea, though, that this isn't a bipartisan agenda. It historically has been. Most of the things that we and others are advancing are highly oriented towards bottom-up, often locally driven growth, including that will benefit the smaller regions, which we call out as real assets for the state. So, we do think that there really needs to be an effort to build this as a bipartisan matter. Rob and I, ironically, one of the first things that fell off our schedules when the pandemic hit was what was going to be a bipartisan, bicameral, hearing on innovation issues in 2020. following up our first report. So we're hoping that there's still some of that bipartisanship in the air, which, we think there is.
So, Mark, talk a little bit about your work with the transition team and how much they seem to have captured these ideas and what they're going to try to accomplish. How much of this could show up in legislative activity or the governor's budget request from what you've been able
Well,
to.
the first question is, what did the transition team wind up saying? And I was very gratified at the very warm hearing that these sorts of ideas got. I thought the transition document from the innovation subgroup was very good. It wasn't just, and it resembled some of our ideas, not because we were so brilliant in cooking them up, but our ideas are directly, reflective of people we were talking to around in the state, and various regions' own strategies. So I think there's a pretty long history in Pennsylvania of recognition of the unique value that your medium-sized and smaller regions bring to the table economically. So it wasn't like this was some radical new idea. So I think we tapped into something that certainly survived and was embraced by the transition. What we understand is that much, more of this will be embraced in the second budget. The first budget, they have to scramble, in 6 weeks to put together something very rapidly. But several of their appointments are already very impressive. DCD is being led now by a innovation-oriented official from CMU. Who truly understands regional technology development and growth. So I think there's some good signs. I think that over the next year, there's going to be a need to keep foregrounding ideas, and you as a region advancing your ideas and yours, and explaining your need for supportive programs from the state, while also the ability to execute your own plans. So I think there's a moment of opportunity here. There's also, I believe, legislation coming out of that's going to reflect some of this sooner rather than later.
You've noticed that there's some things here, and we're going to talk and let some of the people talk about some of the initiatives that are underway here in Berks County. But what do we do to help nudge this along?
Yeah, I'll say a few things, and I'm sure Rob will have some thoughts, but innovation is a team game, and regional development really has a regional dimension to it. So it's all about, the word I use is the ecosystem. It's about how you knit things together. And that's not to say that investments at scale, hopefully, aren't important, but it's important to knit together those various elements, whether it's a launch box program, whether it's entrepreneur support initiatives, whether it's work with a medical school or what have you. So I think how those things are knit together, how there needs to be a common vision so much as possible, and the ability to have a coherent governance around this, to make strong moves at the right time. I don't know, Rob, what would you ask? You've been looking at some of the Build Back Better regional challenge responses, which a federal program that in some ways undertakes to do what we're saying Pennsylvania needs to do for its regions.
Yeah, I'd say a couple things. The first is I've taken a look at, I think you mentioned earlier, Mark, the Imagine Berks economic development plan for the region, and there's some really exciting stuff in there. One of the things that I've seen that many of the most successful kind of regions and metro areas have done is have really strong alignment on knowledge of and alignment of their key clusters, areas that they're already focusing on and areas that they want to expand growth in. And I do think that the plan that you all put out does some of that. I think that there's always room to kind of further elaborate on knowledge around your existing clusters. I don't think anyone does that quite perfectly. The second is thinking through, and I think you're already doing this as well, some of the alignment between your kind of anchor institutions, including higher ed, as well as the firms and cluster growth that's happening in the region. We've seen, university and industry partnerships are one of the things that tends to lead to a lot of success with a lot of these competitive challenge grant programs. And so that's another area to think through. And then, I always think talking about like the through line of equity and how groups that, haven't been historically included in economic prosperity are able to, be more active participants in the innovation ecosystem. And that's really for two reasons. The first, obviously, is because, equity on its face in many ways is a good thing. But the second is that's where a lot of new growth and talent development comes from, especially in a state like Pennsylvania, where overall population growth in the state has been flat and in some regions declining. The way that you promote new economic growth is you bring in groups that have been historically excluded. And so I think that those three elements have been something that we've seen in many of the most successful opportunities.
Good. That's very helpful. I think both of you are aware that we have a collaboration of 12 to 14 organizations that are coming together to support what we're calling the Elevate Berks, or the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And that includes we don't have the big, large research institutions here, but we do have some academic institutions that are interested in this sort of thing. But we also have other partners like the Latino Chamber and the Tech Centro that are focusing on Latino populations. But that idea of trying to strengthen everything by collaborating strikes us as important. Do you see that as something we should be trying to encourage, trying to foster? Well,
Mark, I think you're on mute there.
I think it's essential, for a number of reasons. I think there's substantial literature showing that, diverse leadership, collaborative leadership actually does have better economic impacts, economic outcomes. So I think it's crucial because it matters, because it works. But it's also going to be, I think, important. We see the question about asking the best way to advance your ideas with the state or with the nation. So that those kind of values, inclusion, diversity, good governance, are also how you will win awards. I strongly suspect that the Shapiro administration is going to care about that. We can see, hundreds of millions of dollars of awards from this, from the federal side, asked very specifically how you are managing inclusive growth and governance questions. So I think you're on the right track. I thought the document was quite impressive, and I think you're in a very interesting position in the state, with some proximity to Philadelphia, but also a distinctive county-wide geography. I also wonder if there are linkages. I wonder if there are linkages of your existing presence in battery technology, given the amount of battery investment coming down the pike in the next 5 years federally.
That is an area where we have some strengths. I think we had somebody from EnerSys here. Let me look. But between East Penn and EnerSys, we're doing a lot. EnerSys is doing a lot of research stuff. I know they just had a meeting with the governor's office to talk
Yeah.
about what they're doing.
I can say one actually strong theme in the transition in our report and then in the transition discussions was how can the state do a better job of helping itself and its regions access federal funding.
Mhm.
This is a unique few years. You don't want to become addicted to federal funding, which will not always be there. But right now, for a few years, there's a huge amount of opportunity in the pipelines for
Yeah.
funding of the kind of bottom-up economic development and cluster-based development Rob was just talking about.
Yeah, the cluster-based development, I think, is something that increasingly we have to focus on here. And obviously, battery energy resources is a significant one. There's also an emerging, particularly with Drexel locating the medical school here,
Yeah.
opportunities for biotech, biomedicine. And I may call in run through some of our crowd here and have them talk a little bit.
Rob is actually right, absolutely right, that these are some of the overarching themes of our era are cluster-based development to support national goals while boosting regional competitiveness and
Right.
inclusion.
Yeah,
That's how it works. That's how, the money is flowing now. And,
So
it's based on good, solid observations and literature about how the economy is working right now.
So focusing on some of the clusters where we have an advantage or potentially could have an advantage makes some sense for us to do.
Absolutely. You don't want to simply try to invent yourself out of whole cloth. You will do better at the areas where you already have a presence.
Okay, build on what you got. Speaking of what we've got, I'm going to call on one person here, Del Shade. I want you to talk about what you're doing because it really speaks to some of the key points that they raised here. So talk about what used to be the Science Research Institute.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dave. So I'm Adele Shade. I am the founder of what is now Total Experience Learning, rebranded from Science Research Institute. I moved this program to Albright College about 3 years ago, developed it while I was a high school teacher at Conrad Weiser High School, which I saw some Conrad Weiser people on the call. So hello, it's so good to see you. And so this is a program that took 10 years as a teacher to create a new way to manage classrooms so that teachers could meet the Pennsylvania Department of Ed standards, but allow students to invent in their interest areas at the same time. So what started as a science initiative is now in every discipline. We're K to 12. We have over 200 teachers in Berks now trained through a one-year training program in the methodology. We have over 1,500 individual projects coming out this year. But I think what really relates to this conversation is that we have 10 patents secured from students before they leave high school. We have 2 more in the pipeline right now in the last 3 years. So it's a very unique situation for this age group. I think even for a company to have 10 to 12 patents come out from Berks County in that time is a little unusual. So we worked with the U.S. Patents Office to create the first set of policies to protect this age group so that we know how to identify real intellectual property. We have one small business that has now spurred out of this for a new building product. And so this whole methodology, even if you look at it as a business unit, is now going international next year. So expanding outside of Berks, we're looking to train teachers. We have 8 areas identified, 5 states within the US, and then 3 different countries. So I think to look at, and this is why I put this in the chat, I have been reading your study for the last 3 years, and we actually use it in our teacher training program. It's the first thing we show to educators. And the first thing I show to them is the pie graph of Pennsylvania and where our R&D money sits, and that's State College, Penn State, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. And the entire rest of the state in your pie graph is a 1.5% little sliver.
Right.
And that's our space in between. So my question as we look at all this, so we have this really unique thing that has bubbled up as really a ground up movement in education in Berks to reach talent in the spaces in between. We now know how to protect all their ideas and start business out of that. So now what do we do with that? How can we work with you? What's the next step?
Well, and the story you're telling is so indicative, and it very much reflects the way Rob and I see the states and indeed the nation's geography. You know, we've had a short list of superstar places getting all the attention as the great focal points of innovation in America, and the rest of the state and the rest of the country indeed sort of ignored. You know, our view is that there is incredible potential out in smaller communities and different communities. And we need an innovation strategy, both at the national level and at the state level, that actually believes that and, you know, take steps to try to unleash it in more places. And so at the state level, Harrisburg isn't going to know where to look exactly, but they should have put in place programs that are supportive of regions that are developing new ideas. So we think, you know, the innovation strategies that we've recommended, especially these, you know, bottom up hubs of regionally, you know, to unleash regional problem solving, decided at the regional level is the way to do it. And it sounds like could be very helpful if there's the beginnings of a kind of, you know, education innovation cluster in your region.
I think one of the problems.
And we're I'm sorry, I wanted to just address as one comment quickly. Yeah, I also heard you talk about PA Smart. So we're a second time recipient of that. We got a first round 3 years ago, got a second time now. So truly with those two grants, it's been $1 million of investment in us in the last 3 years from the PA Department of Ed. And that is the base for what spurred this and allowed all of these teachers and students of Berks County to kind of rise up.
Well, Dylan, I'm going to make you do something else here because they talked about diversity and equity and inclusion as being a significant part of this. Talk about the relationship with the Reading School District, which is largely Hispanic and low income.
Right. And my percentage may be slightly off, but I'm going to say 86% Latino, 99% free or reduced lunch eligible. And so and these two of the students from that district, I think, are next to ready to start filling in patent applications. But being able then to reach that talent in different ways. We're integrated right alongside the Reading School District in our programs, but also educating their teachers so that every classroom can actually spur this creative thinking and bring students up through that process as those creative thinkers. Now, every student's not going to get to the point where they're going to apply for patents, and that's not the goal of the program. But when you set up great, you know this, when you set up great creative environments, this is going to be an outcome some of the time. So how do we do this in more places in Pennsylvania that are the spaces in between?
And it sounds like you have a kind of methodology that you believe works and is tested in unique places and responds to something of state and national, you know, value. I think it's very impressive. I mean, it seems to me exactly the kind of thing that could really benefit from scaling up through some kind of, state support.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And-
Mark, you
and-
took,
Go ahead, Rob. Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, Mark took the word that I was gonna use right out of my mouth. I think there's been such a common theme with so many of the areas that we've looked in Pennsylvania, and it's been about scale. Like in every one of the conversations we have with folks, like literally in every corner of the state, there's already a half dozen things that they're doing that are solving the challenges that their region is facing. And then the question is, all right, we get it to a point, and then we can't scale it. And we see that with policy, we see that with regional efforts, but we also see that with firms itself, right? Like that is the central challenge that the Pennsylvania innovation economy faces. Is there are a ton of brilliant innovators here. There are a lot of really smart people that are doing local and regional policy efforts, but innovators can't turn their products into companies. When they do turn them into companies, they can't get the funding to stay in Pennsylvania. Smart students that want to enter the field are leaving the state as a result because firms are leaving the state. And then regions, when they have great ideas on how to solve for these problems, can't get the funding to expand their initiatives to the scale needed to grapple with the overall problem that they're facing. And so that is really like that scale problem is the exact one that we're hoping to solve with some of our policy recommendations. And in particular, those two challenge grants that we mentioned, like this is the exact type of market failure that those programs would be designed to solve for. The region is already doing some great work. You have many of the answers. Like if the state came to you and asked what the answers are, you would have them already in many ways, right? It's just a question of how do we take what we're doing and then getting it at the scale that we need to solve this problem in the order of magnitude that it's on. And so we really just, I think like one of our themes is regions are already doing this work, and there needs to be some state overhead. You guys need some air support, to help do what you're already doing.
Are there good examples of other regions in Pennsylvania that are doing the sorts of things somewhat like what we're doing, or ahead of the curve here?
Mark, you're on mute there.
There are many regions are doing fascinating things. I mean, the things going on in Philly and Pittsburgh are well known, but we're struck by Erie taking the lead in a serious way on trying to build on the wreckage of its engine, its locomotive business,
Right.
to see if there's a place for a kind of green dynamo, train, an engine that actually doesn't emit emission.
We've got a partner for them right here in Berks County.
We also don't believe that rural places have nothing to contribute here. We think the Pennsylvania Wild design, which actually was a semifinalist in one of the national competitions, is very interesting. And we think there is a degree of innovation in trying to figure out what a high value tourism strategy might look like for a rural area. So, and I really want to learn more about this one. This is the Adele's story. These are great stories that
Right.
Need to be told.
And one of the things, Mark, that we have done is, we're not adverse to stealing from places. So
Yeah.
what with the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the Elevate Berks, what really generated that was sort of two factors. One was stuff that was happening in Lancaster County that we could borrow on.
Yeah.
And two was the Penn State Launchbox deciding that it was good to have regional partners, not just partners in State College.
Yeah. I mean, I think Rob and I see these as, incredibly important signals. We want to see, though, if the state could amplify them. They remain isolated signals and exciting
Exactly.
points of light, but can this be blown up a bit to the point where it begins to change the shape of the economy and really create, value and jobs in
No,
new places.
that's a good
Yeah.
point. I mean, otherwise the potential of a lot of children starving across the Commonwealth.
Well, and you have a lot of headwinds, and the state needs to take more of a role in trying to help fan the flames in a useful way, I think.
You mentioned the Ben Franklin Technology Centers and the Life Science Greenhouse. What role could they play in helping with this? I know that they had a lot of their funding cut at the end of the Rendell administration, and I don't think it's come back. Is there a role for them to play?
A little of it came back. They made a lot of, there was a lot of fuss made about really a rather modest reinvestment. I mean, Rob and I think that your state was one of the first to realize that innovation has a geographical play and needed to involve the whole state. We think it should be fully restored to, the level, its budget is roughly about 30%, I think, in inflation adjusted terms. You have on the ground existing a critical network. You should build that back up. Rob, what would you were sort of flabbergasted when you first looked at this, the story of Ben Franklin's. What would you add?
Well, I think the thing I'd say is the Ben Franklin's just, I think, like almost definitionally, and the Life Sciences Greenhouse need to be at the center of any of the strategy because they were the main vehicle for the state's flowing its state small business credit initiative money through to entrepreneurs. That money is primarily going through the Bens and through the Life Sciences Greenhouses. The challenge there, right? And I'll say two things. The first is, that money is coming through in addition to the kind of modest small increase they got in the most recent state budget, but it's purely for investment, right? Like it's purely for equity investment and loans. What that misses is there are a lot of complementary business supports that entrepreneurs and small business and new businesses need if they want to scale. And if you pour all of your funding into simply doing loans and equity investment without any of this complementary support, then that money isn't going to be as effective because it's going to limit the amount that companies can scale. And so I think that it needs to not just be more money for making deals, but it also needs to be more money for business supports, because I think that specifically has been an area that the state government has been pulling back in over the last decade.
Yeah.
And I think, like, fundamentally, again, one of the challenges that Pennsylvania faces is that companies get to a certain size if they want to expand, and then many, not all of them, right? Obviously, folks on this call are very much rooted in this place, but many others leave because they can't get more funding in Pennsylvania, or they expand elsewhere because that's where they're getting funding to do so. And a big part of that is just that the capital hasn't been here at the same level as it's been in places like Boston or New York or California. And so that's a market failure by the private sector, right? And that is, part of the whole justification of having things like the Benz and the Life Sciences Greenhouse is they're rooted in place. And they are going to continue to invest in Pennsylvania companies. Now, one of the problems is, the amount of funding that they've had in recent years has been so small that they can't compete with these private sources of funding. And so there's a little bit of, it's a catch-22 where you, in some ways, need place-based capital, but the place-based capital has not had enough investment to really operate in a way that they can compete with the private sector. So, one of those has to give. And I think in our view, it's better to build on a foundation that you have than, kind of throw up your hands and not do anything.
I mean, it's a case where you have a tool, you have an instrument that exists, and yet it's being underfunded and misused when it actually has a very good record of helping firms scaling up and return something, multiples of every dollar put in. So, that's a starting point, is fund the things that you have that work.
Right.
But
So-
we do think you need some new instruments and some new investment as well.
I don't know, Kim, do you want to say anything on behalf of the Ben Franklin?
Sure, thank you, Dave. Yeah. I agree with many things that you're saying. We have seen some more funding through SSBCI funding. It does go to, startup companies, startup endeavors. But I will say that along with our manufacturing grants and working with universities, whether it's the manufacturing companies we support with our grants to help with innovative processes in their production and efficiency, and whether it's for startup companies, we do support them from the minute they get into our portfolio to whatever stage they go to next, making those connections. If they're not quite ready for our investment, which we are typically their very first outside funding many times, we look at those companies that are, pre-revenue, just getting their product developed. We help them with all those initial steps so that even if they're not ready for our funding when they come in, we get them ready for our initial investment. And then we continue to work with them, mentor them, connect them to our network, connect them to whatever that next step is, if it's the next step of investors, and just those connections for whatever they are in need of. We try to consider ourselves the one-stop shop for that new startup. So whether it's the incubators, whether it's connecting them with patent attorneys and marketing professionals, continuing that support system to help maintain those companies here in Pennsylvania and create those jobs in Pennsylvania.
That's great. And we would say that, the BENs would be integral, participants and, bottom-up cluster efforts in existing and new regional hubs.
Yes. Yes. And we did just get that SSBCI, and then I'll stop talking. We did just kick off a new life sciences and healthcare technology fund, given that we have this SSBCI funding to support those startups, and hope to partner with community partners as well. So thank you.
Yeah, and that's a good target area for us. Mark, early in the presentation, you talked about childcare and access to childcare being an issue. Can you elaborate on that a little more? And are there other impediments like that we should be trying to focus on as well?
I think that must have been in Rob's section.
Okay, maybe it was Rob.
Do you want to touch on
Yeah.
that, Rob?
Here's what I'll say. I think that with there's nothing unique to Berks County about childcare in terms of it is a challenge everywhere, right? The cost of childcare is high. The supply is limited. It is, it's kind of a patchwork of, home care, childcare centers, folks having to drop out of the labor market to take care of their kids because that's the only way that it makes sense for families, right? And so this is not like necessarily a Pennsylvania alone challenge. This is a national challenge, right? I think you've seen some of this with the federal initiatives where, places that are receiving federal funding now are, there's new policies around the need to provide affordable childcare for workers. But, in over the course of our work, we've heard, really two things that stood out about the childcare discussion. And again, I think this is affecting like almost every family that has kids. So like, I just want to caveat that. But we've heard really like two challenges that stand out. The first is that, especially when it comes to advanced manufacturing jobs, especially in production occupations, many factories are working on a 24-hour cycle. And so folks that are working a day shift may be able to have access to childcare, but folks working the overnight or the early morning shift often have a lot more trouble accessing childcare. So to the extent that regions are thinking about making advanced manufacturing a centerpiece of their economic development strategy, the consideration around childcare for workers that are outside of the kind of typical 9 to 5 window needs to be, I think, center there. Otherwise, it's going to restrict your opportunity to, attract new workers into the sector. The second thing I'd say is, the data kind of overwhelmingly shows that childcare burdens fall disproportionately on moms rather than dads. And I recognize that Mark and I are two guys preaching to you about this, right? So the irony is not lost on me here, right? But to the extent that you want to begin closing the gap around the participation of women in advanced industries, which our data shows is really prevalent and consistent over time, childcare has to be part of that discussion because all of the evidence shows that the burden of childcare disproportionately falls on women. I'll say two other areas that come up, and neither of these are going to be surprising because, again, they're pretty universal, but it's housing and transit too. When you think about these kind of complementary investments that aren't really core to the innovation economy, but are necessary conditions for it to happen, transit and housing are always kind of top of mind. We haven't looked at the specifics of Berks County when it comes to those two areas. That was just a little bit beyond the scope of this report. But in conversations we've had across the state, that's always relevant in some regard. The ability to get folks from where they're living to where the advanced industries and innovation sector jobs are, because those two things often aren't co-located.
No, I think those are real issues here. Getting people to East Penn from Reading is difficult. And housing is a major issue that if you read the county plan, it's one of the 6 areas that they've targeted as an area of focus. So,
and by the way, you're not alone on this, and it's a sign of how prominent these issues are getting, that when the Commerce Department rolled out the rules and criteria for big semiconductor companies to access subsidies, they were required to deliver a strategy for childcare. A few commentators were incredulous at this bizarre topic, but most people felt that it made a lot of sense. And that's because the lack of women in some labor markets is meaningfully adding to labor market tightness and shortages of workers. So I think what Rob is saying, for both housing and childcare, these are reaching, cresting at a new level of importance nationally.
So takeaways for us. What I'm hearing are several things that we should think about. One, building on the platforms that we have, the stuff that's happening with Adele, some of the advanced manufacturing industry that we have here in Berks County, building on that, identifying some additional clusters. Maybe could you talk a little bit more? I know you highlighted what you said were advanced manufacturing, but could you say a little bit more about specifically what types of industries we're talking about there?
Yeah, we have and we can share with you, the detail, the detailed industry by industry list. But these are industries that have a high level of R&D investment and that have a significant amount of STEM work in their employees. They are demonstrably they're often manufacturing oriented, but technology driven manufacturing, but also pharmaceuticals are in there. Medicine, medical devices are in there. I know I'm just thinking of things that I've seen in your profile, but there also includes the digital world. So as a whole, they have high pay, high export content. They are just in general have wage premium and have large supply chains. So they're very valuable industries. So to us, these are the capstone industries. There are other valuable industries, often business and professional services, management of companies. Those are important too, but they don't have the same impact and rippling impact on the economy. So those are the first place to look, but you'll find that they are a relatively small number of your portfolio. And we can get you the full numbers. We cranked out all of your advanced industries.
Oh,
There's no doubt that your, both for size and scope and growth, it's very much around a few companies in this battery space, which isn't a bad space to be in, but you might want to be thinking about how you begin to diversify.
Yeah, it seems like that is an area that's a strength for us, but relying solely on it is probably not a wise idea. So identifying the clusters sounds like it becomes a first priority for us as a strategy.
Yeah, sure.
And you talked a lot about the diversity and inclusion, the support for women-owned businesses, the support for minority businesses, and we've got some activities here that I think we can try to highlight as well that could be helpful in that area. So that's good news. Is there any other advice you give to us? Who do we need to talk to in Harrisburg to make this happen? Who do we need to?
I mean, Rob will have things he wants to add, but I would say that you, like other regions, have to be assertive and more assertive and not accept business as usual. I think that this is a very special moment with a lot of things in the air that are very supportive of what you're doing. A new valuing of small and medium-sized economies, and a new governor. So that has signaled, a degree of interest in these issues. So I don't think there's any percentage in just trying to do it all yourself. You've got to get really good at the things you're doing, but you need to hold them up, assert the importance of a different strategy with much more investment into regions. And I think the next 2 years are absolutely critical. And I believe them that I think there will be significant, activity in especially the second budget, but I think there's going to be legislative activity this year. So, I think you would want to get very specialized, specific and good at relating what you need as a region and what your strategy is as a region. I don't know, what would you add, Rob?
I'm actually just reflecting on a question I saw in the chat earlier from Marissa around the disparities that we noted, and asking kind of what can groups like chambers and associations do. I'm reflecting on some of the regions that we've been working with that have had a lot of success on winning kind of big federal funding and kind of changing the trajectory of their clusters and economic growth. And I think Pennsylvania kind of faces a couple challenges at once. One of them is the state has a tight labor market, but even as it has a tight labor market, there's still a lot of exclusion in the state's highest paying, largest supply chain, strongest correlated with economic growth, advanced industries. And it's also still facing challenges around economic growth. And companies, I think, even as the labor market's tight, are still having trouble in some cases finding talent. So how can those four things be true at once, right? And one of the challenges, or one of the things that we've seen when other places have tried to solve for those challenges is really, there needs to be intermediaries that bring together the education institutions in the region with companies and making sure that those offerings are aligned. And I think some of that's probably already happening in this
Mhm.
region based on everything you've been talking about, right?
Like,
And to the extent that that can be encouraged and that can be facilitated by organizations like chambers and associations, that's going to go a long way. And I'll say, this matters on K-12, but it also matters in higher education. There have been some places that we've seen that have largely forfeited getting folks into degree programs, whether those are 2 or 4 year programs, at the expense of going, all in on certificates, credentials, other things. Certificates and credentials matter, and there needs to be pathways for workers without a 4 year degree. But there also still needs to be an effort to get as many folks into, useful degrees as possible, and then transferring them into, advanced industries, occupations, because we see all of the data shows that the workers that are most likely to have success in a lot of these advanced industries occupations have a 2 or 4 year degree, and folks that are most likely to start firms have a degree. And so I think you do really need both. And not only do you need that, but you need to ensure that the degrees being offered and the curriculums align with the jobs in the region and can really set people up to get hired. So connecting folks with employers in the region, providing them with the soft skills needed to be successful in interviews. All of that I think is happening, but to the extent that that can be continued and scaled up, I think that's going to go a long way. Many of the places that we see that are most successful have really, really close alignment between 4-year regional public colleges, 2-year community colleges, and regional chambers and associations. And those chambers and associations are really the key conveners between industry and higher ed and K-12. And so I think that that's a perfect role that associations and chambers can play. And my bet is that they're already doing that in many ways. But when I saw that question in there, that was the first thing I thought of.
thank you, Rob. Marissa, did that get to what you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, it did. Thank you so much.
Good. Jen, you raised a bunch of questions. Do you want to ask anything in particular? No, okay, we're okay there. Okay, well, we're getting close to the end. If I can try to summarize, thank you. This has been a terrific conversation, very, very helpful for us. What I'm hearing is identify our clusters and try to support and grow them. To collaborate and engage and be inclusive is important. To build on the platforms of what we already have, and to be strong advocates for us, for what we're trying to accomplish here. Okay, Jen, you can do your plug.
I'll put it in the chat. I was going to put it in the chat. My fingers were just too slow, but I did want to say that as it relates to innovation, in the climate economy, we're just seeing a lot of interest in green sustainability, anything that is carbon reducing as a revenue generating venture. There's a lot of opportunity there, and I'd love to. I think we're gearing up to perhaps offer a webinar on this. We're really compiling the information on the new categories of business in terms of carbon management, reuse, circular economy. I mean, there's just a lot. So what I'll put in the chat is, again, not a question. I do see Mark shaking his head, so any affirmation on that is welcome. But I've teamed up with Regional, which is a nonprofit in Lancaster. I'm a innovation consultant. I work with existing businesses and help them branch into new products and services. And so this naturally makes sense. There's just a lot of opportunity. So we are going to host monthly meetups. We're calling it Carbon Neutral Coffee. And so we'll meet once a month, and we're going to talk about growth opportunities in the climate economy. It'll be in Lancaster, and I hope that folks here might consider joining us, and maybe we'll start offering something in the Berks area, because there's just, it's very much connected to the manufacturing industry as well. There's just really a lot that happens. So Thank you to the Berks Alliance for hosting this session. It was great.
But thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. John Weidenhammer, do you have any closing comments you want to make?
I do. First of all, I want to thank our presenters from Brookings. I thought it was really an enlightening conversation. And I want to thank our panelists for really jumping in, not our panelists, our participants for jumping in and adding to the texture of the conversation. I think what you hear is that the opportunities abound in Berks County, and that if we can collaborate, there's really no end to the number of things that can be pursued. I tend to agree with the statement that Mark made that we need to kind of focus on some of the existing businesses that we have and some of the sectors that we already occupy, and try to expand them and build on them, maybe in that space or in some of the adjacent spaces as well. But the main thing I think is that we need to continue this conversation, and we'll try to bring to our audience more of these kinds of topics so that we keep it as something that's top of mind. The Berks Alliance really has an intent to be a leader in encouraging collaboration among the entrepreneurial ecosystems. And one of the things that Jen, I believe, mentioned to me in the chat is that we need to think about existing businesses too, particularly the small ones that have an intent to grow, to see what we can do is to deal not just with startups, but with our small and medium-sized businesses, to see if we can't really help them scale their business, because often with the right kinds of consulting and ideas, these small and medium-sized businesses really can scale much more quickly than a startup even. So we need to make sure we bring resources to them as well. So again, I know we're at 1 o'clock now, so I'll just say thanks to Mark and Rob for a great presentation. Brookings really has a treasure trove of great research that they've done, and I would encourage you to look at their website. Sometimes it's hard to find, but if you persist, you'll find that the content there is really quite good. And Dave, I'll just turn it back to you. Maybe you want to give a commercial for our next session.
Yep.
That's coming. But again, thanks everybody.
We are getting a website redesign, so hopefully it'll be easier.
Okay,
We will,
well, good to know.
Just a reminder, we will send everybody a copy of the video, and we'll also send you a link to the report because it's worth reading it if you haven't read it yet. Mark and Rob, thank you very much. This is very, very helpful and frankly, very inspiring for us, because I think it's sends some positive statements about what we're trying to do here in Berks County, and encouragement to keep on doing that. And I want to thank everybody who joined us, even if you joined us just for a short period of time. Thank you very much for that. And thank you all of you who are working on these sorts of things here in Berks County. As John mentioned, I want to talk about a couple quick things that we're going to be doing coming up. In April, we have 2 spotlight programs, one on the County Greenways Plan and another one on a very interesting initiative at Kutztown University and their social media lab. And then we're going to be doing a community forum on violence prevention in Berks County. And just this morning, I think we were close to getting it confirmed. We're going to have the Federal Reserve Bank do a presentation in May on the role of anchor institutions and what kind of function they can have in the community. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Mark. Terrific stuff. And we hope to see everybody at future events.
Thank you. Great being with you.
Thanks, everybody.